right, I'll set my water off to the side. We are continuing this week through the book of John, and we have finally made it to chapter 2. We're on our 4th week in the book of John, and we have finally made it to chapter 2. I really enjoy the slow and steady pace going through it this way. And we find ourselves, if you didn't notice by the call to worship this morning, at a wedding, which seems to be just the right way to kick off the year 2022 for me personally, as currently I have 6 weddings on my calendar. That's a lot of weddings for 1 year. Most of them are family. One of them is a former youth here, and then a family friend. So we have all kinds of ways to celebrate. And as we get into this sermon today that's called Words of Abundance, the theme being abundance, and I thought we have an abundance of weddings to go to this year. So the text this morning is going to talk to us about abundance and about miraculous signs that Jesus performed as he kicked off his earthly ministry. And this is the event that set things in motion. It's an interesting interaction that we read this morning between Mary and Jesus. And typical of John, the Gospel of John, there is so much more to it than meets the eye. John gives us more as in an abundance, in such subtle ways that we will miss it if we're not paying really close attention. And I am sure that I'm not covering everything that we could really break this scripture down in and find. I'm sure I won't even cover all of them. So a popular pastime, I don't know if you have heard of this before, is searching for Easter eggs. Have you heard of doing that, looking for Easter eggs? Have you heard of it? You've heard of it. And I don't mean the little plastic candy-filled ones that we pick up on Easter morning. It's when you watch for something that's kind of hidden, especially in movies. They especially do this in movies. At Disney, you look for hidden Mickeys. And you'll find Mickey hidden in all kinds of places that you didn't know he was there. And it sort of led to these Easter eggs, such as, again, Disney Pixar. If you're familiar at all with the Toy Story movie, then you might be familiar with the Pizza Planet truck. And did you know that the Pizza Planet truck makes an appearance in every Disney Pixar movie? It's in the background. It's the picture of it. Somewhere they've hidden the Pizza Planet truck, and you find it. It's an Easter egg when you find it. All these little things that are hidden. Which movie is it that has a tower of toys and the Beast from Beauty and the Beast is in that? I think that's in Aladdin. Those are all Easter eggs. And so now people have gone to paying more attention when they see something on the big screen, and they look for those little tiny subtle things that have been hidden in the background. They're in songs, they're in movies, and we call them Easter eggs. And so this morning, when we go through John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, we're going to search for Easter eggs. Things that are in there that are not really obvious when you first look at it, but when you uncover them, it's like finding a little prize. And so there's a lot of Easter eggs in these 11 verses. So I'll read through it at first, and then we'll go back through and we'll look and see what Easter eggs we can find. I am reading from the NRSV, John chapter 2, verse 1. On the 3rd day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water, it had become wine. And I don't see the connection here on my screen. Let me look here. Verse 9. I think it skips a word on my screen. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. I ask God's blessing on the reading of his word this morning.
Thanks be to God.
Amen. Now, people sometimes read this that's the recounting of the story that John said, and well, that's a really nice story, water into wine, that's pretty cool. But what greater weight is there than the obvious miracle that Jesus made water into wine? What greater things can we see in there? What Easter eggs can we find? Well, let me tell you, there's a lot of Easter eggs here. And it starts right there in the very beginning of chapter 1. Chapter 1, the first verses says, on the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. So when we hear the words on the third day, what else comes to our mind? What's that? Resurrection, that's right. We say it, when I hear it, I automatically hear the rest of the Apostles' Creed in my head. On the third day he rose again to sit at the right hand. You know, we hear that because we know on the third day that Jesus rose. And so we put that right there with resurrection. So in this very small way, when he says on the third day, we already kind of instinctively connect it to the resurrection of Christ, which is so far away from this moment. This is the beginning of his ministry, not at the end. But John, and you will see this over and over, especially in these 11 verses, how he connects the beginning of time and of Jesus with the end of all of the Old Covenant and the New Covenant starting. He just keeps drawing these connections. So we hear the third day, and instinctively we kind of go to resurrection. But it's interesting that number 3, we like the number 3, Trinity, third day. There's another number that's kind of uncovered if you're keeping track from where we've been the past 3 weeks until today. Verse 1 of chapter 1, John the Baptist is testifying to who Jesus is, right? So there's first day, John is testifying. And then on verse 29, it says the next day, John saw Jesus coming. I cannot talk this morning, I apologize. John saw Jesus coming. And then in verse 43, it says the next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. So we have the next day on the verse 29, verse 35, and verse 43, besides the first day where John's testifying. So there's 4 days. Verse 28, or 1 to 28, 29, 35, and 43. And then it says after these 4 days, it was the third day after Jesus got to Galilee. So if you add 4 and 3, what do you get? 7. So if we do our math from that one chapter up to verse 1 in chapter 2, we not only get 3 in our mind, the resurrection day, but we get 7, which is the days of what? Well, it's creation. The days of creation. So the whole book of John starts out with, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And right here at the beginning of chapter 2, if we put our math together, we have that beautiful number of 7, which also takes us all the way back to creation and connects creation and resurrection in those few verses, those few words right there. On the third day after Jesus arrived to Galilee. So we have these 2 wonderful connections here. If we pay attention, we find that the words are connecting the beginning of time and the beginning of the new covenant. Jesus' hour, which we will hear reference to many times in the gospel, Jesus' hour had not yet come, but we already have the connections. And on the 7th day, God rested. On the 7th day, God took time to celebrate creation. And so here on the 7th day, since John 1:1, Jesus is at a celebration with his new disciples. And there they are enjoying life. And it says his mother was there too. So it was customary in that time for the women of the community to come together and serve the meal and all of the drinks and everything at the wedding banquets, and the men would enjoy. And so Mary was probably one of the servants, one of the ones serving the wine, because we wonder, how come Mary was the one who noticed that they were out of wine in the first place? Well, she was probably one of the ones serving. It's actually been somewhat believed that this might have been some of their family that was having the wedding, since Jesus and Mary were both invited, and he was kind of going back to where he was from to go to this wedding. So it's kind of been suspected that she might have been helping serve at a family or a very good friend's wedding. And so we see then in verse 2, it says, Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding, and The commentary I was listening to this week said, okay, we know why Mary and Jesus were there. Why the disciples? They didn't know them, but for whatever reason, the disciples got to go. And then we have this fun interaction between Mary and Jesus. At verse 3, it says, when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Did Mary ask a question there? She did not. She simply stated, they have no wine. Whenever I visualize this story, just from the things that we know, we sort of put our presuppositions onto things. I always think she must have asked him to do something. But she just kind of went there and said, the wine's all gone. And Jesus says, what is it to you and me? What difference does it make to us? What's interesting also here is he says woman. First of all, Mary being referenced as woman instead of by her name. Now, today's day, if someone says woman, it's hard even for people to read it. On my commentary, the guy said, I don't know how to start my sentence by saying woman, because nowadays we would say, woman? And he said, I know that's not what Jesus did. Then he said, I don't know how Jesus would have said it, because often Jesus said woman instead of a person's name. And so he referenced her, he said, woman, what is that? And so he calls her not by her name of mother, or even referencing her as mom, which some people take that as sort of a not a very kind way to address Mary. But I feel that this might be a place where Jesus was departing from earthly parenthood and starting into his divine parenthood. And so maybe he was calling Mary woman, not that she was all of his family, trying to kind of create that. And we'll see that again, the connection between his beginning of his ministry and his end. When at the foot of the cross she was there, and he said the same. He referenced her as woman there also. Woman, why are you weeping? And then, woman, behold your son, when he had John look over her. And so we see the connection even there from the very beginning of his ministry to his death on the cross, where Jesus called her woman. But she says the wine has run out. Instead of asking him anything, she simply says the wine has run out. Jesus asks her, what difference does that make to us? And then sets out to doing what she wanted him to do, which is kind of an interesting thing right there. The difference for him that his hour had not come. Perhaps if you've heard me preach on this in the past, you know then that the bridegroom was expected to have wine for the entire time of the wedding feast. And so a wedding feast was several days long, and they were expected to have all of this wine, and it was supposed to not run out. And so it would have brought shame upon the family had they actually been out of wine. And so Mary may have come to him in concern, especially if this was a family or a friend, you know, that she knew, and just telling him that the wine would run out might have brought shame. And that might have been part of the reason that it would make a difference. But what godly difference could it mean for the wine to run out? Mary was concerned. Maybe it was her job to make sure that the wine was rationed properly so they wouldn't run out. What we do know is that she said just as few words as she could, making a statement and bringing the issue to Jesus' attention, and then left it there. That was a bold statement of faith on Mary's part. And the way that Jesus responded honored his mother. He may not have called her mom or mother, but the way that he reacted by honoring her showed that he did appreciate her as his mother. It also connects us to another miracle that we'll find later in the book of John, John 4, when the official comes and he's a Gentile and he says to Jesus that his son is going to die. And Jesus says, oh, you're not going to believe anyway unless you see the signs and wonders. And even though the official has been set aside, kind of like Mary had been, he did the same as Mary by saying, Lord, you don't even have to be there. You can just say the words and my son will be made well. And so this same great display of faith that you don't even have to touch it to make it happen was done. And there's a connection there between the official and Mary. So maybe it was Mary's faith that moved Jesus into responding. Maybe it was a sense of honor because this was, after all, his mother. In pictures, we see Jesus with this wine and the jars, and we see an interaction happening, making it change into wine. But that's not what the Bible tells us. In fact, we really get very little detail about the miracle that took place, but we do get a lot of details about the jars. And those jars have a lot of Easter eggs in them. There were 6 stone jars. Stone would keep things within them purer. If you had a clay jar that held your water for ritual purification, it might be latching on to something outside the jar and letting that into the water. So it was a less pure thing. So the stone itself was a pure receptacle. And then they were holding water. These were not ever meant to hold wine. You would never expect to pull wine out of these jars. Wine would not be in them. So to find wine where you definitely would not expect it is a little bit of an Easter egg. And then the fact that this water was meant for Jewish purification. The scholars who talk about these jars and where they were kept and how big they were say that these were probably the hand washing water for between the things in the meal, when they had the bread and then they would wash their fingers, then they would move to the next part of the meal. And so since these jars were empty, the meal was done. And how big of a meal would it be? Because each of these jars holding 20 to 30 gallons would make it 120 to 180 gallons of water. That is a lot of water, is it not? And yet they were empty. And when the servants added water to them and then gave a sip to the chief steward, it was deemed the best wine yet. And then said, in doing this, Jesus revealed his glory. Who was privy to that glory? Who knew what had happened? No one except the servants and maybe Mary. Mary, the one who said, do as he said, and then the servants who noticed that what they put in the jars that was water and then they carried and then they dipped out of, Jesus never touching it, were filled with the best wine. He gave a gift, an abundant gift. I'd say 120 to 180 gallons of wine is a big gift. Free of charge, only known about by the lowly, the servants. Kind of like Jesus' birth, mostly known first to the shepherds. Without touching anything, just the power of his word, the most luxurious gift beyond a reasonable amount was given. 120 to 180 gallons. Not a bottle, not a case of wine, a lot. Beyond a little, abundant. John's gospel shares this story of Jesus and the very first miracle. And he calls these signs. John doesn't often call the things that Jesus did miracles. He calls them signs because all of the things that Jesus did pointed back to God. They were signs of God, signs of what God could do, signs of God's wonder and his abundance, and that what he gave was just so much beyond even what we could imagine and free of charge. This all points to God and all connects from the beginning of John to the end of John. But in order to see all of these connections and all these Easter eggs, we have to be paying attention. Someone wrote this week that they'd heard that the ministry of Jesus starts with the ministry of paying attention because Mary was paying attention. She paid attention to what was needed. She paid attention to who would be affected, and she paid attention to ask Jesus. And then she was filled with faith because of what she had known. You know, all through Christmas we hear that Mary pondered these things and kept them. She paid attention. So we begin this journey with Jesus at a celebration, at a wedding. Weddings and the gospel, there's symbolism even in where he was at. In the time that this was written, wedding symbolized joy, of course, because we were all happy. It symbolized new life because the couple was coming together and would form a new life together, but it also represented the new life because children would come in. So weddings represented joy and new life, and they represented the community coming together to celebrate. So it's no stretch of our imagination to see how these things connect to our message for our faith. It was reiterated through the things that we see in here, reiterated through Mary because of her intense belief in Jesus. There are connections between the Old and New Testament when they talk about Jesus' hour. It's reiterated with the old jars. Those old jars represented the old covenant. Ritual washing was part of the old covenant. But what would they be filled with? They would be filled with wine. And what is wine in our communion? What does it represent? The blood of Christ, which is the new covenant. So we see the old and the new come together, and we celebrate. The third day, we celebrate when Jesus' hour truly comes. And we know the love of God triumphs over all darkness in the universe. Jesus' first miracle was nothing short of amazing, and it's filled with so many Easter eggs, so many connections with his divinity and his humanity. I invite you to look through the Word yourself and see what other things we probably didn't even scratch the surface of today, and see what other Easter eggs you can find and other signs of God, things that pointed to God. For us today, though, I hope that we would find courage in the faith of Mary, that we would ask God for his abundant grace, abundant, so much that we can't even imagine, grace beyond our wildest dreams. Even if we can't see how our plight should matter to Jesus, it matters to Jesus. Just like the wedding celebration mattered to Jesus. And it gives Christ joy when we dig deeper into his word, seeking to grow in our understanding and seeking to realize how we see it over and over and over, that his vision for us is unimaginable joy. Perfect peace that is found in recognizing Christ in all of his glory, for God's glory to be found. It's not just the big miracles where glory is found. It's found in small ways. It's found in the everyday things, in our gatherings as family, in the beverage of our glass, in the love among family. We see it in the sunrise and in the sunset. In every single good thing, there is a touch of the divine. I found a prayer this week written by Reverend Joanna Harroder, and I updated it a little and changed it. I'd like to close with that prayer this morning. So if you would bow with me in prayer. Holy One, I give you thanks for the water turned to wine, for the miracle that allows the celebration to continue, for Jesus' first sign, which is not a disease healed or a prejudice corrected or an authority challenged. He will get there, Lord. You will get there. But first it is this sign. We see your sympathy for the host. We see your honor shown to your mother, your consideration of your friends. We see you invite the community to linger for the music and laughter to continue a while longer. We see you enjoying the warm glow of the happy gathering. I feel sometimes, God, that the burdens when I ask for something, like a big miracle, when we pray for the transformation of lives and early systems, we desperately need these, but sometimes, Lord, I feel guilt in asking for these small things even, and personal favors, for moments of ease or lightness or joy that seem frivolous at best. And yet, here you are, in the beginning, giving us wine and laughter and music and grace abundantly. You give us miracles that lift our burdens, if only for a time. So I give you thanks for where you began, where you journeyed to, and where you remain. Amen.